Hello everyone, this is part 5 of What If Naruto Owed Ino a Favor, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. Oh, Inoki said in a tone that brought shivers down the younger man's zen. He placed his hands on his hips, bending over to look Naruto in the eye. Eyebrow-ed, a clueless expression played upon Inoki's handsome features. Naruto gulped. The aculated saliva was not enough to rid of the lump that had welled in his tea. His fingers dug deep onto the cotton of Ino's shirt, tugging the clothing on her as a signal. I'm scared, the gesture announced, absolutely out of my wits' end. Naruto observed the piercing lively orbs that stared back, a bright cerulean hue that had him fixated on finding his blue reflection. Crazy, eh? Inoki spoke once more, his broad, stable voice lingering into the air. It was difficult to indicate whether the man was peeved or only teasing. Ino bit her mouth, feeling the pinch as a relief from the anxiety. Although she knew her father was eyeing Naruto at her navel, her mere assumption of his reaction was enough to make her wish she was 12 years old again. She wondered if Naruto could feel it, by the way he clung to her, the way her knees were shaking. Yeah, Naruto muttered, a stressed chuckle drifting into the atmosphere. He felt himself shrink before the great Jonin. But before the expected violence commenced, the elder threw his head back in laughter. Inoki's cackles bounced against the walls, nearly shattering the teenager's eardrum. Smart answer, kid. Inoki's palm hovered over Naruto, who immediately flinched. With his eyes tightly shut, Naruto could not see what Inoki's hand was doing. He instantly grew tense as the other man's hand made contact with him, and it took a few pats on his head for him to realize the older man's reaction. Really? Ino arched an eyebrow. You're not Ma. Course not. Inoki grinned, teeth showing. Standing tall once again, he embraced her as he felt her shoulders relax. Ino, I'd never be mad. I was only joking. I didn't think the boy would be so easily upset. Naruto felt the air forced out of him. His cries of help were muffled in what little breathing space he had. Easily upset. He thought, that was an absolute death threat. But didn't you always push for Shika? Inoki's ears twitched at the sound of the other Jonin, Ino's old Team 10 member. Ah no. Inoki waved his arm, rolling his eyes. That's your mother, Ino. She's a total nutcase. Finally, he pulled away, turning his attention to Naruto. So, are you going to cling to her all day? Naruto loosened his hold on Ino, his hands pushing against the floor to help him stand. In all actuality, Naruto was now the tallest out of the rookie 9. This was truth he held to the boldest extent, always finding time to mock Sasuke for it, who happened to be a fourth of a centimeter shorter. That did not matter to Naruto, who remained infatuated with the idea of being taller than anyone of his peers. So as he rose, it came to the greatest disappointment that her father stood a good 2 inches taller than he. I guess I haven't really introduced myself properly. He cried out, an octave too loudly, offering his wavering hand. The edges of his broad smile twitched uncontrollably, and he felt sweat begin to build up in his palm. Inoki smirked, grabbing onto the hand. It was a few shakes later in when he felt the twinge of his bones popping, and it took all the will in the world to ignore his newly crushed fingers in Ino's father's firm hand. He shifted his gaze towards Ino, who had clasped her hands together, too pleased with her father to acknowledge his phoniness. Ah, so how has the baby been treating you? Inoki asked, releasing the solid grip on Naruto's hand, leaving the younger boy trying not to wince. Actually, she's really quiet, we haven't had much of a problem with her. Ino smiled, glancing at the sleeping child. That's always good. He chuckled, walking over to the child. But it's about time to say goodbye. What? Naruto exclaimed. Ino widened her eyes. Yeah. Inoki settled the child in his arms. Her parents arrived this morning. They were a bit exhausted, so I offered to come by. Right now. Inoki watched the frown form on Ino's face. Yes, Inoki replied, the grin on his face turning into a frown. But, no one even told us. He sighed, walking towards the carriage. I thought I was doing you a favor, Ino, he said, his fingers fastened onto the plastic handle. Naruto and Ino were silenced by the idea of having Satomi taken from them. The clicks and snaps of Satomi being strapped echoed against the walls, ringing in Naruto's ears. It was a depressing sight, and as much as he believed the infant had her annoyances, it was strange to have her leave. We could have dropped her off at Asuma-sensei's, mumbled Ino, observing the way her father lifted the carriage. Satomi was caught amidst one of her afternoon naps, snuggling into her padded carriage. Ah, she quickly snapped, her index finger lifted, you're right. Phew, glad that job is over. She made a gesture with her wrist, gliding it across her forehead. Glad you see it that way. Inoki reached over to kiss his daughter's cheek before adding, Ino, don't let yourself get so caught up. I'm sure Asuma and Kurenai will have plenty of missions in the future. Her father smiled one last time, his back towards the two as he headed towards the door. As much as Ino wanted to follow her father, she allowed herself to become comforted by his preceding words. It was Naruto who dashed forward, grabbing onto the door before it would click against the lock. Wait, he shouted, into the ear of Inoki, who cringed by the sudden yelp. You forgot this. He pulled the strap that hung from his shoulders. The Jonin received the baby bag, nodding his head. Niece, he replied. He leaned forward, his friendly tone disappearing as if it never existed. Believe me, I wouldn't have hesitated. And as Naruto instinctively lifted his head for a loud quip of some sort, a retort, or even to go as low as an acceptance to his challenge, the man vanished before his very eyes. A true ninja indeed. What awaited before the open door consisted of fallen tree leaves, leaking the autumn shades. Oh yeah, we'll see about that. He shouted at nothing in particular, fist pumping in midair. His foot flicked the end of the door, hearing it shut with a simple click. Naruto his hands together, simply pleased with himself. Crazy man, he mumbled under his breath. A grin marked his lips. But we have the place all to ourselves. You know what that means. He lifted his head, witnessing Ino situated on the couch. Her hair was tied on a messy bun, with a few fair-haired locks in disarray. She hugged her knees towards her her mouth hovering above her kneecaps. It was a strange sight, he noted, on how easy it was for her to be beautiful, without even trying. She nuzzled her temple further into the cloth of her pants, her face hidden between her crossed arms. You know it's funny, in the beginning I didn't want her here. I would have been happy with her gone, but now. I wish she could have stayed longer. Yeah, I know. He plopped himself beside her, his arms suddenly resting against her shoulders. We'll be the first to volunteer, alright. That is, if we don't have to do missions. Oh wait, I meant when I don't have to do a mission. Shut up, she snapped, raising her head. Rolling her eyes, she playfully punched his side. I figured it'd be that way. I haven't had a mission for months, I suppose I'm on the waiting list. Yera, he drawled, but don't you worry, I've been pestering Granny Sooned long enough, and she promised to put us both on my next A rank. Really? Course. He pressed his cheek against her knee. I'm just hoping your dad doesn't K me before then. My father's just worried about me, she assured him, he's a nice guy, really. Yeah, I guess, he said flatly, completely unconvinced. Autumn was in early bloom, by the way Ino observed the leaves blend into the mulud of auburn and ginger. She found herself absorbed by the decorations of nature, the vivid hues among the trees ahead of her. She tugged her scarf, her bracelet dancing with motion. It clacked against her skin, alongside the layers of shirts and jackets she managed to pull on this morning. She frowned, believing she overdressed for a surprisingly warm day of September. So, are you going to enlighten me anytime soon? Naruto brought his palm towards his mouth, coughing to crack her distraction. Ah, I wasn't out of it for long. She pushed him lightly, her fingers probing for his arm. And no, it's a surprise. The mere thought of the destination had her heart pounding. A nervous chuckle left her, she tightened her fingers against his warm palm. They continued to stroll leisurely through the backwoods, their legs treading through the small heaps of aculeated leaves. This looks familiar, he observed, surprised by her sudden anxiety. I'm guessing we're heading towards the riverside. Ino breathed deeply, her hands beginning to jitter. She believed Sakura was already waiting for her. She could picture it now, Sakura with an impatient expression, tapping her foot against the wooden docks. Her rosy hair already tied in a small braid, a few short hairs sticking out on the back. Well, she can, Have the medical nin waiting for too long, right? A few bushes covered the entrance to the pond. Ino, who remained too restless to wait, pulled away from Naruto's hold. She ran from him, trotting past the bushes. Naruto paused, jamming his hands into his pockets as he watched Ino leave. Geez, what's gotten into you? He shook his head, biting off a grin that sought to cover his face. Ino halted from her sudden dash, bringing out her arms to press herself against the railing. The current tugged the scarf loosely from her shoulders as it danced in the wind. You actually showed up. Sakura beamed, and just as Ino predicted, a bikini top was exposed under her open jacket. Course I did. I'm here for the free meal, and to kick your ass. Yeah. Sakura sucked her teeth, engrossed in her sarcasm. I'd be a good day if you didn't drown. You wish. Ino grinned cheesily, grabbing onto Sakura's hand. Something about Sakura's behavior swayed Ino's silliness. Ino laughed, loudly and obnoxiously, fueled by the irritated expression her friend gave her. Sakura held her mouth agape, prepared to question Ino's sudden goofiness when something caught the side her eye. She lifted her head, ignoring her friend's ridiculous conduct. She suddenly smiled, yanking her limb from Ino's grip, as she charged towards the teenager who appeared to have waited for her. Ino held her grin, as she casually leaned to the side. Her arrogance had her practically egotistical. It was when she saw exactly who Sakura was running towards was when she quickly finished her mockery. Naruto flicked at the twig that stuck into the fabric of his jacket. He squinted his gaze, raising his arm to wave Ino over, but she appeared to be occupied with some sort of free. He paused, his pulse coming to a shattering end. He felt the bee drain from his face, a dark sort of pang sinking into his abdomen. Speechless. He was speechless. His light eyes became fixated on the figure who unexpectedly charged towards him. He wanted to run, to dash completely backwards and head on back to home. As he urged his legs to move, he found himself fastened on the timber. Sakura called his name. He cringed. Naruto was taken aback, shocked by the gesture. He shivered from the warmth he felt by her touch. Her scent unexpectedly stirred his conscience. I'm sorry, Naruto, I couldn't help it. Her arm swooped from under his jacket, embracing his waist. I missed you. I realized what a mistake I was making all these years. He stared at Sakura, her rosy orbs filled with affection, with gentleness. He would have replied, but he found it hard to breathe at the moment. That dinner was so beautiful. Dinner? When in the world? I forgot how funny you are. She mused, continuing to admit herself. Gosh, I love you so much. He felt himself grow numb. Finally, she pulled back, a sweet smile still plastered on her lips. We have a lot to talk about. She tapped her fingers against his parted mouth, adding, but I have to do something first. I have a bet to finish. Sakura turned away from him, skipping her way back to the end of the docks. Naruto felt his mouth quiver. Terrified, his eyes darted to the female who appeared to be shocked, her fingers clutched towards her sea. He could not quite specify the look in her eyes, from so far away, but he could feel the heartache tear at him. Ino. He called out, awkwardly, nervously. Miraculously, his legs gave into the thought of movement. He stumbled a few steps before dashing ahead as fast as he could, despite the effort his conscience made to completely stop. Ino swallowed the awful lump that formed on her tea, indulged in what felt like hatred and rage. Her fingernails dug angrily into her palm, she felt the pinch of her skin breaking, but did not flinch. As Sakura drew nearer, she had all the urge to give her so-called friend a nice blow to the face. Yet, she stopped herself, and held all the accumulated bitterness within. As much as she wanted, oh how she longed for relenting into abhorrence, she knew Asuma-sensei had taught her much wiser. Ino flung the scarf over her head, no longer concerned with its well-being. She could not remember if she yanked her shirt off in an attempt to get herself equipped for the race, or because it was delaying her chance to beat down Sakura, but the water no longer looked so chilly in her dearest opinion. Ino bit her lip, pulling at the jeans that clung to her, before stepping into the cool pond without hesitation. All the lessons in the world could not prepare her for this. Geez, Ino, you're in a hurry. Sakura chuckled, taking her jacket off. So what will we have? To the end of the other side, Ino blurted out, too enraged to speak any further. Sakura dipped herself into the water, yelping from the icy water. It's so cold. She brought her arms to her sea, given out a shiver or two. She placed her fingers onto the docks, raising herself enough for Naruto to see, it's a race, and watch me win. Sakura advised him. So, here goes nothing. She laughed, tapping her palm onto the surface. 1, 2, 3. Naruto scurried, hoping to get around the body of water before either of them could finish. He ran through the woods, his eyes were fixated on Ino. Whoa, he murmured, astounded by the dangerous will in Ino's eyes. She practically fell through the water, against the flow of the wind. He could not believe it, the way she pushed her arms forward and swam through the bottomless pond. Sakura was miles behind, she too trying to make her way through the water. Naruto shouted Ino's name, gasping for air as he ended his own race. He felt himself double over, almost losing his balance as the sense of his surroundings was now lost to him. You don't understand, he said, surprised even by his own tone of voice. He watched as her arm grabbed a hold of the side of the pond's edge, her digits digging into the dirt as she propelled herself forward, winning the race. She took 2 steps out of the pond, drips of water trickling down the curves of her body. Her eyes held a dark tint to them as she took a few more steps forward. Hard, forced breaths released from her sea, she wrung her hands into fists as she forced herself to ignore the person in front of her. Naruto grabbed her wrist, tugging at it weakly. He stared at the ground, the echoes of the soft wind becoming the melody that rang into his ears. Ino, please, you don't understand. A loud snap, a crack of a whip was heard afterwards. At least, that is how Naruto interpreted it. His cheek was forced to face away from her as her palm made contact with his face. It was a livid gesture, he could feel the tears build up in his eyes from the sting. Her huffs of air recoiled as she continued to walk away, wordlessly. He stood there, his fingers raising to hover over the warm spot. He thought to himself, the sick reality beginning to sink in, where the nightmare of having to face his fears was propelling itself into truth. It didn't matter to him anymore, what Sakura must have thought, but he felt himself quickly grew tense, his hand too jolted to rub at his sore cheek. She seems in a real hurry. Sakura clapped her hand against the ground, breathing in loud, tired puffs. I guess she won. Shikamaru grunted, not at all fond of being ignored. Sure, he missed that whole match Ino would not stop talking about for weeks, the very same contest that he obviously was training Ino for these 10 days or so. He guessed oversleeping was not the greatest excuse in the world. He sighed once more, his knuckles knocking against the door in an impatient manner. The Jonin glanced to the left and to the right, witnessing no onlookers as he began peek into the small hole that was carved from the door, in a heart shape of course. It was embarrassing, having to peek through the house for his silly friend. Yet, that is how far Ino's stubbornness would go, as long as she got the attention she wanted. Amazing, he scoffed, his hand cupping the doorknob. From the peephole, he could see Ino situated on a kitchen stool, her back to him. You have quite the ability to disregard, he said, opening the door in full swing as he entered her house. It couldn't have been that bad. It was then that his dark eyes spotted the unnamed bottle of sake rolling from the kitchen counter, plummeting into the carpet with a muffled cling. I guess the event called for a celebration. He snorted, a bit surprised, he knew Ino was not an alcoholic. His eyes widened, the sight of the counter had him alarmed. 4 bottles of unarranged sake bottles were resting upon the surface of the counter. A few drips of the container to the far right dribbled in a small puddle of clear liquid. Wow. He kicked the bottle, witnessing it twirl with the motion, before gradually coming to a halt, pointing its tip towards the girl in front of him. The aura that poured out of her left him wordless. She had her back hunched in his direction. He bit his lip, concerned by the soft pitter-patters of her breathing pace. His hand reached forward, gently brushing against her shoulder blades. On impulse she spun from her chair, lifting her eyes as she gazed at the taller man in front of her. A sick silence passed between them. Shikamaru could not think of any preceding words for the life of him. He understood that this was not any sort of feeble problem. But before he could actually find any consoling words, any soothing utterances, just about anything to keep her from looking so completely miserable, she yanked his shirt, pulling herself into his sea. He felt her heartache spill in front of him in the sort of sense that left him frightened. She cried, her dry sobs reverberated, ringing his ears. He figured she had already cried before, by the hoarseness of her vocal cords. A frown smothered his mouth, as he accepted his impression of helplessness. Instead of scowling, a loose sigh escaped him. He gradually brought his arms against her midsection, pulling her into the tightest embrace he possibly could. She lost her balance, squeezing herself onto his torso. He allowed his teeth to skim along his bottom lip, attempting his best to speak any sort of assurance, but found none. "I'm sorry," he spoke moments later, "for whatever it is that you're feeling." The more she cried, the more foolish she felt. Sasuke rolled his eyes, his palms scrunching into fists. He tried to remain casual, in his usual arrogant saunter, but today there was no umph in his step. In fact, there was just no impulse for pride. He scratched his his slippers dragging long behind him. Obsidian eyes darted towards a figure who gleefully flipped a stack of pancakes that sizzled pleasantly on the frying pan. It was mayhem that was occurring before Sasuke Uchiha, a peaceful disorder, as he'd like to describe it. He grit his teeth, his limbs tensing. The despicable acts of kindness had been going on for a while now, and he was nearing his breaking point. Somehow, in this sick charade, he had tolerated days of a very perky, and awfully cheery Naruto. He could still recall the chills that ran through his spine at his friend's arrival. Though he couldn't remember it perfectly, the absolute sadness that withstood in Naruto's features, when Sasuke managed to open the door, were impossible to forget. "I need a place to stay," Naruto had said, that night. Although it was a strange appearance, it was nothing new when it came to his good friend. Sasuke had become accustomed to having Naruto appear at the drop of a hat, in the most random of moments. But this time was different. There was no fox-like grin on his face, nor did Naruto take the time to pat his head or any of the sort. But, at the time, Sasuke did not think much of it. The boy was probably tired, he figured, or something. It was bound to pass. Yet, it did not pass. To anyone else it would most likely appear to have, but in Sasuke's eyes, it certainly had not. The plastic smile Naruto would flash was undoubtedly the first clue. There was no possible way anyone on Earth could be so happy, 24 hours a day. Sasuke was beginning to miss his friend's old, unbearable persona. "Morning, Sasuke. Ya want some, ol' buddy?" Sasuke cringed, glaring angrily at his blonde friend. An exhausted sigh left Sasuke as he grabbed his plate in defeat. Well, that was corny, but what else could he expect? He had 3 weeks of corny. Not to mention that unbearable humming. Having snatched the plate from Naruto's hand, Sasuke crammed a pancake into his mouth. He chewed heavily, crumbs falling from his slightly open mouth. "What are you, incredibly hungry?" "No." Sasuke then reached his arm over for another pancake, ignoring the burning sensation on his fingertips. "Not at all." "Oh yeah, I'm not convinced." The Uchiha boy eyed his friend, I should say the same. He watched as Naruto passed him a glance that implied uncertainty, but only for a second before his signature smile emerged, the fox-like grin. This caused Sasuke to snap. "What the hell is so funny? Is this one of those days for you?" "I should have been warned beforehand," Naruto replied. "In your case, I should have been warned weeks ago." "Really, now?" Naruto aired an eyebrow, lifting his pancake. He offered. "No, I don't want any more. In fact, stop cooking for me like you're some kind of wife of mine." Pancake bits flew every which way. Sasuke managed to pump his fist into the air for some time before he realized Naruto was no longer paying any attention. The latter curved his mouth to the side, appearing rather distressed, looking at nothing in particular. It was then that Sasuke made a grab for Naruto's collar, scrunching the cloth into his fist. He made a harsh jerk, pulling the blonde so as to have his cerulean eyes completely in view. Naruto did not react, yet, he held on to his sadness, shifting his gaze to his friend. At this point, Sasuke would have preferred his hyperactiveness. "What's wrong with you? You're happy one second, and the polar opposite the next." "I guess I couldn't fool you," Naruto said, shrugging his shoulders as Sasuke loosened his grip. "You sure couldn't. That was a piss-poor job, in fact," Sasuke criticized, yet a relaxed expression played upon his features. "Don't tell me this has something to do with Sakura." Naruto sighed, folding his hands behind his "You have no idea." Ino felt the sunshine tickle her face, and turned over. She forgot to close the shutters again. Getting up was not as easy as it used to be, her phase of being a morning girl now over. Her legs were tangled in creased bed sheets, and her limbs shivered from the lack of warmth in the room. Ino rolled her eyes, an exasperated sigh leaving her. Sleeping alone was not as fun as it used to be. She groaned, then clicked her tongue. Reaching for a pillow, she understood that she could no longer fall back asleep, but perhaps pretending was just as good. For the few seconds that followed there was a nauseating silence. She could hear the muffled laughs and giggles of children waddling in the snowy weather, unusual for November. She then grunted, suddenly disgusted with her lethargic behavior. I gotta get up, she cursed under her breath, lifting herself from her arms which ached from lack of exercise. It was a doorbell that abruptly brought her inert for a moment. Who is that? She asked to no one but herself. Her mind scanned for the possible candidates as she made her way out of her messy bedroom. Shika, Chuchi, can't be, they both came yesterday night, Asuma-sensei. Ino scratched the back of her ear, making her way towards the door. Her palm latched onto the doorknob, the cold metal sending a chilly shiver running down her en. She frowned as she observed her attire, knowing that it was unlike her to be so sloppy. I bet it's my father, Ino muttered, crossly. The door creaked as it was opened, exposing a certain rosy-haired girl. Ino suddenly felt her muscles tense at the sight of Sakura, who only held a smile. Ino's fingernails bore into her palm, almost breaking skin. What the hell is she doing here? Hi there, Ino. Sakura leaned forward, pulling her friend into an embrace. Geez, Ino, it's an hour past noon, when the heck are you going to get up? She spoke against her ear, bringing a second round of quivers. Never, alright. Ino pulled away from Sakura, stepping back a few feet. Oh, stop. Sakura walked into the house as she proceeded to turn Ino around. What are you doing? We're getting you showered, changed, and you and I are going to have a little chat. Ino frowned, pushing down on her heels until Sakura could no longer press forward. It was a sick thing to do, she thought, to rub it in her face about that whole swimming incident. Well, she was not going to embarrass herself twice. I'm not going, Sakura. What do you mean, silly? Sakura chuckled, letting herself into Ino's room. You've got to. You won, remember. It was a bet, and I'm not going back on my word. A real top-notch meal, my treat. Shocked, Ino wiped at her sleepy eyes. She completely forgot about that stupid bet. Either Sakura had something up her sleeve, or the girl was really oblivious. Well, let's see, this is really cute. Sakura squealed, pulling the blouse from the closet, throwing it onto the bed. She turned, surprised to find Ino standing before her. Well, go take a shower, we don't have all day. Maybe she was lonely, and maybe she really did want to talk to Sakura. Whatever the reason it was, Ino only slumped her shoulders in defeat, dragging her feet into the bathroom. She groaned when she stepped foot back into her room. The gloomy atmosphere that she had established over the weeks was no longer, instead a new set of bed sheets welcomed her, as well as an almost perfect view of the sun's rays practically blinding her. What did you do? Ino shouted, clutching the towel closer, her foot stomping onto the carpet. You wrecked my room. Ha! Sakura turned, rolling her eyes. Oh please, she waved her arm, casually. It was depressing in here. So are you going to change or what? Ino cringed at the sight of the clothes that awaited her. A stupid dress was not at all what she wanted to wear. In the ess of winter, it seemed, it was not the best thing to have her shoulders bare. As much as she complained, Sakura kept insisting. Fed up, Ino snatched the dress from her friend, stomping towards her dresser for her undergarments. A few seconds passed, as Ino idly hummed to herself, looking through the heap of underwear before she noticed Sakura was still in the room. Sakura, get out. What? Why? I've seen you changed plenty times before. Sakura reverted her attention towards her cuticles before saying, we don't have all day. Ino glimpsed at her menu, utterly surprised at the prices listed. Why'd you bring me here? A fast food place would have been nice. She held her breath, peeking below at her dress, and came to the conclusion that perhaps Sakura's choice of a restaurant was better. At least, walking into the fancy joint wasn't so hard, especially when they cranked the heat. I've never been here, Sasuke said it was nice. Sakura observed the setting, impressed with the velvet hues, and scarlet drapes. It was apparent that red was a favorite in this restaurant. Maybe Sasuke's gay, Ino muttered. It was a moment before she hesitated, realizing what she just said. She brought her hand to her mouth, imagining if she had indeed said those words. By the way Sakura stared at her, mouth slightly agape, it seemed so. For a second, she thought of excusing herself or at least taking back her words. But what followed shortly became a shrug. Well maybe he is. She chuckled, her finger gliding across the words as she read them aloud. What followed was another one of those awkward silences. Sakura probably was still infatuated with him, she guessed, as much as a childhood crush can get. It seemed as thought she was not bothered for long when she asked, so what's been up lately? Don't know. Ino shrugged, observing the antique radio at the far end of the table. She felt her stomach squeeze, but refused to dwell deeper into her memory. It's sorta hard living alone. It isn't so bad, Sakura laughed. You'll get used to it. Either that or I'll be busy being poor. She smiled, amused by her own joke. She felt a bit odd at the moment, a little comical and witty. The more she spoke, the more loose she was beginning to get. How about you? In all actuality, Ino wasn't very interested in what Sakura was doing. Same, Sakura blurted out. Except, she began to chew on her lip. Ino suddenly locked eyes with Sakura's blue-green orbs. A sudden splash of sadness then settled within Ino's stomach. A few chills ran down her spine. There was something sickening that forced her to gaze at Sakura, where the girl across from her began to shift uncomfortably in her chair. Well, Ino rolled her eyes, quickly growing irritated with Sakura's non-existent problems. An embarrassed laugh slipped from her tongue. It's nothing I guess. I mean it's actually sorta stupid. Just ignore me. Oh number. It's far too late for that. Ino's chin bumped against the glass table. She understood her behavior was far too childish than usual, but shrugged it off. To be sitting across from the girl she wanted more than anything to strangle, especially keeping her big mouth shut while doing so, she thought the best way to act was indeed casual. This was just about as relaxed as she could get. I think we've known each other far too long to just let something slip past us, don't you? It's just that he's been ignoring me. I haven't spoke to him since we had that race. Sakura reached towards the right, where a portable antique radio rested against the mirror wall that reflected her sad expression. She fiddled with the dial, hoping to occupy herself with the fizzle of noises of random radio. I miss Naruto, she sighed. Oh. Ino suddenly pushed herself against the cushion of the chair, her heels tapping against the wooden floor. No longer able to control herself, she leaned forward, her teeth grinding against one another. Are you serious? She managed to blurt out, her impulsive wave of anger rushing past her. Yeah, I know what you must think. Sakura s her forehead. You'd never think I'd actually like that idiot, but it seems we're both wrong. No, that isn't what I'm trying to say. Unfortunately, Sakura's full attention was diverted into the radio, raising the volume so as to disregard any signs of irritation from Ino. You probably think I'm crazy. We went on one date a few back and I saw a side of him I never thought existed. Ino forced herself to swallow the anger, and instead continued to listen to Sakura, who appeared to be more of a damsel in distress the more she spoke. He's a little silly, but it wasn't until that day until I realized how cute and funny he really is. Sakura rested her chin on her palm, her fingers continuing to turn the knob this way and that. He's real crazy, you know. He still loves me after all these years and I always ignored him. For what? Sasuke and I were just meant to be friends, I now believe. The entire time, when we were on that date, he was so mature and not so ridiculous. Anger slowly became sadness. Ino felt the hot tears begin to sting her eyes. She turned away from Sakura, focusing on the simple design of the radio as well. Would it count, if you didn't act like yourself? He asked again, his voice burning into her memory, as crisp and clear as when he first questioned her on that cloudy day. It was then that she realized, the day when Naruto suddenly flopped onto her bed, the day where he happened to have a lot on his mind, she never thought she'd figure him out so easily. Maybe this time, I'm not wrong, maybe it is love. I pushed him away for so long, I hope he still feels the way I do for him, Sakura whispered, and wiped at her eye, smearing a small tear from her face. Except, you weren't in love with him to begin with. Ino wanted to scream, to shout, to cry. She felt a lump beginning to form in her tea. As much as she wanted to express herself though, she knew the girl sitting across from her wanted nothing more than to do the same. What was she to do? She sighed, watching with misery as Sakura finally stopped the dial. The sounds of claps and a piano echoed from the radio, filling her ears. "Ooh baby love, my baby love," the words lingered into the air, and Ino felt a quiver of grief depress her entirely. The odds, she thought, of a stupid little love song to seal the silent void. "I need you, oh how I need you. But all you do is treat me bad. Break my heart and leave me sad." Forcing any and all nausea-inflicted emotions, Ino turned to Sakura, finding the way she sulked in her depression distressing, not to mention pathetic. "All right, enough," Ino cried out, her fist banging onto the surface, breaking Sakura from her gloomy spell. A smile formed on her lips, as she took control of the radio, quickly tuning out the song in hopes of find one with a lighter mood. "This is crazy. You're driving both of us insane," she declared. Another resonance of percussion played from the radio. Her smile grew into a grin, as her heels tapped with the beat of the song. She knew this song, and she knew it pretty well, thanks to her parents' adoration of Saturday morning radio. She snapped her fingers, pulling herself into a standing position. Sakura widened her gaze, speechless at the sight of Ino preparing to make a fool out of herself. Ino quickly grabbed onto a knife that rested on the counter, as a heel of hers settled itself on the table for balance. "Ino, what are you doing?" B began to rush onto Sakura's cheeks. She bit her thumb, turning to the people who suddenly caught interest in the two of them. "Allow me to serenade you," Ino smirked, bringing the knife closer to her lip. Sakura, her tone of voice lowered a few octaves, so as to match the tone of the woman on the radio. "Darling Sakura. Ino, please." Sakura sunk herself lower, so as to avoid the curious eyes from the bystanders. "Not here, come on," she whined. "You're just as crazy as Naruto. Thank you for all the joy and pain." Ino moved to the beat, the ends of her dress swaying. She guessed there were people staring, but frankly she could not care less. With one hand close to her mouth, and the other directing at the humiliated Sakura. "Picture shows, second balcony, was the place we'd meet, second seat, go Dutch treat, you were sweet." Ino leaned forward, tipping her finger on Sakura's chin, completely amused by the embarrassment she was ensuing. Okay, I'm not sad anymore, get down." Sakura cupped her hands together, whispering to Ino in what became a mother-like tone. "Get down right now. Sakura, darling Sakura, thank you for walks down Lover's Lane." It was Sakura's wishful thinking that had her hoping no one would witness this charade. But, she knew damn well how incredibly wrong she was, and as she met with the eyes of the crowd that happened to form around their table, with an Ino who was just too into the song itself, she could say that there was a small tinge of amusement in her, seeing Ino parade around like that. "I can see, hearts carved on a tree, letters intertwined, for all time, yours and mine, that was fine." Sasuke widened his eyes in complete silence. There was no quip, no sarcasm. For once in his life, Sasuke was out of whim with his words. He could only stare in wonder as Naruto finally finished his fantasy dream. What a guy, he thought, he must have been up all night thinking up this bee. Really, he was beginning to understand the Sakura bit, but when he decided to throw in Miss Ino Yamanaka, that was when he could only stand back in utter disbelief at the liar that was Naruto Uzumaki. "Wow," he said, "just wow. You don't believe me, do you? You expect me to believe that you're involved in some sort of love triangle with Sakura and Ino Yamanaka?" Sasuke arched an eyebrow, witnessing the blonde nod his head earnestly. He waited a moment before saying, "Yeah, okay. Well, I believe I'm starving. That little tale you told me took the entire day, what an imagination, Naruto. Sasuke, this is real, it's happening, and I don't know what to do." Naruto grabbed onto Sasuke's shirt, shaking the Uchiha air. Sasuke was unimpressed, or rather, he could not find himself to believe him. He grabbed onto Naruto's hand, plucking the fingers away from his shirt. "This seems more to me like a fantasy than a nightmare, in your case." Except, finding no other retort, he allowed for that to settle. "I think I'm in. I forgot to mention, I don't care to listen." Sasuke quickly interrupted. "Love, I think I'm in." That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.